While A Nightmare on Elm Street 2: Freddy's Revenge wasn't popular with critics or fans alike, the movie was a financial success, and it had become clear at that time that Freddy Krueger was an entity that was going to be around for a long time. With that being the case, and with seeing how profitable and popular Wes Craven's creation had become, Craven had interest in returning to the franchise for the inevitable third installment. What would soon be known as Dream Warriors and become a fan favorite was actually quite a bit different in its inception. In 1986, Wes Craven was asked to come back to A Nightmare on Elm Street to direct the third installment. He had interest in it as well as New Line Cinema, so it seemed like a perfect marriage. But at the time, he was directing Deadly Friend, so he was not going to be able to direct the film. Enter Chuck Russell, and we would get the film that we ended up getting. Dream Warriors marked a turn for the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Now, obviously, that would be exacerbated in Dream Master, but this was the turn when Freddy started to have his one-liners, started to be a little bit more humorous, and it ended up being a bit more bombastic and larger scale than the previous two films had been. But Wes Craven's initial intent was to be darker, more malevolent, and far less funny. In Wes Craven's initial idea for A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, some of the differences were as follows. First, although we had been told in the original film that Freddy Krueger was a child killer, Dream Warriors initially was going to explicitly call out that he was a child predator. Now, for obvious reasons here on YouTube, I'm not going to use certain words to explain what I mean, but you get the gist. There was even a line in the script that was going to directly call Freddy that. So it would have been a little bit more clear, and probably would have made the 2010 remake land better with people because the remake went that route, explicitly calling out that he was a predator, not just a child murderer, or maybe not a child murderer at all. On top of that, some of the famous scenes in Dream Warriors weren't going to be a thing, such as the Zaza Gabor cameo. That was never in Wes Craven's original idea. Craven stated years later that his idea for A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and the main focus was going to be focusing on Nancy and her father. That was going to be the driving force of his movie. He wanted it to be truly more of a direct sequel than we actually ended up getting. However, Craven did have the Dream Warriors concept. He did have the concept that there was going to be a team of people. There was always going to be a team of teenagers that had to fight off the bastard son of 100 maniacs. That was always going to be the case, but the Dream Warriors were a little bit different. Craven's idea, Neil was much younger, Philip was much younger, and Joey did not use a wheelchair. He was someone that was challenged when it came to getting around, but he was not bound by a wheelchair. So minor changes from what we ended up getting, but could have been significant, especially the age gap. These characters being 13 as opposed to 18, 19, 17, that range, could have made a big difference and maybe played a little bit more into the fear of these characters. Another big issue with some of Craven's ideas for Dream Warriors were that he was writing a $20 million script, as Rachel Talalay had said, saying that there was no way they were going to put that to film. Yes, Freddy was popular, but it was almost unheard of at that time that you would put $20 million into a horror sequel, especially only 2 movies into the series. You just don't normally do that. So there were things that Craven was asking to do that New Line Cinema was not going to pay for. So that created some tension between the two parties, and honestly, probably in the long run, was a good thing that Craven was directing Deadly Friend, because I don't know if he would have accepted. In Craven's idea, Nancy was going to be on a road trip to find her father, where they would stumble upon a town where wayward kids are drawn and commit suicide. But for what reason? Freddy Krueger. Well, these kids were to be the Dream Warriors that were to band together to fight this evil. Now, obviously, the Nightmare on Elm Street 3 we got ended up making her a mental health worker, making this a mental health facility for these young kids, and definitely changed the amount of screen time that John Saxon was going to end up getting, and really the whole inception of why Nancy and Saxon were back in the first place. Craven's idea was also going to have a different emphasis on Freddy growing stronger with each soul he takes. Now, that is a theme that obviously was played up on as the movies went on, specifically in Nightmare 4 and 5. But the main crux of it all was that Wes Craven wanted to return Freddy Krueger back to the true, terrifying dream demon that he was in the first film. But as he stated, When he was brought on to Nightmare 3, it had almost been made clear to him by New Line and everybody involved that they wanted this to be a carnival type of House of Horrors franchise. They were going in a much more humorous direction, and Craven didn't like that. He hated Freddy's Revenge. He has openly talked about how he thinks that movie completely misinterpreted the idea of Freddy Krueger and the Nightmare on Elm Street series. I happen to completely disagree with Craven, but I understand, because tonally it is far different than Nightmare 1 or Nightmare 3. So for a multitude of reasons, many changes in tone, budgetary, and scheduling conflicts, Wes Craven didn't return to direct A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, and his contribution to the film got simply reduced to a story by credit. Now, some of that is true. A lot of what he had written, the idea that he had pitched, is in there. The skeleton of it is in there. But it was vastly changed. So while Craven does deserve story by credit, this is not the story that Wes Craven wanted to tell us. Now, over the years, fans have speculated and asked, and you can read this script online if you so choose. All you got to do is go to Google and type it in. You'll find it. I did myself. You can read this and you can decide, as many fans have, what would have been the better route to go. A lot of people would argue, seeing what we've now gotten with the series, that what we ended up getting was probably for the best. Dream Warriors is heavily regarded as the greatest film in the series. Dream Master was when Freddy went to MTV and truly exploded. Those movies are some of the most fun movies, even if they're not your favorite, in the entire series. And we got a best of both worlds, because Wes Craven was able to come back in the 90s with New Nightmare and give his much darker, serious approach to Freddy Krueger. So you could say both parties won at the end of the day. It is also important to point out that for the longest time, Wes Craven had fought with New Line Cinema about money that he felt he was owed for how big Freddy became and how little he was paid for that. He rightfully believed that it was his creation and he deserved back end from that. And he thought that Bob Shaye was withholding that from him. So when he eventually came back for New Nightmare, it was almost kind of like a sweetheart thing. Hey, we know we owe you something, so come back, you can get it, you can put your name above the title, and it's great. But that was part of the impetus for why he wanted to come back for Nightmare 3 as well. The relationship between specifically Bob Shaye and Wes Craven was never great. Whether it was money or personality differences and clashing on set, it's well documented that that was a thing. But I do think it's important to mention that that is a reason why Wes Craven wanted to come back for what ended up being Dream Warriors. But I want to know what you guys think. Let me know down below what you think about some of these changes in the tone and the story for Dream Warriors. Would you have wanted to see Wes Craven's Dream Warriors? Or are you happy with what we got? Either way, I think it's safe to say that we're all at least happy that we got to be welcomed to prime time, bitch.